incumbency play on whether people are going to run for local government?
Oh, that's a really good question. Typically, incumbency has a set of advantages because you just get known. And people don't like to vote for people they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So challengers against incumbents always have a potential problem of surmounting that. But in local government, in the local office, the districts are really small, relatively speaking to, let's say, congressional or Senate races. And it's possible to overcome that. You can walk an entire city, for example. You can get a lot of citizens to help you do this and overcome other financial advantages of incumbency. So it's possible to overcome incumbency, particularly in local races.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, when incumbents run and they don't get challenged aggressively, it's usually a sign that the public is not really unhappy with the direction that the city is taking.
Mm-hmm.
When it is unhappy, when the public is unhappy, then you're going to find challenges even against incumbents.
Well, I think that may be the case with Florence because at least 3 incumbents dropped out. They're not running again.
Right.
And so that opened up the doors. The mayor had only agreed to do 2 terms, so one of the council members who left her seat, someone else was appointed, but she's running for mayor. And obviously when there's an open mayoral seat, somebody else always runs. But that goes to the next question. When you do have incumbents, are there outside forces, and by outside I should say beyond incumbency, that affect whether they're going to be challenged? You mentioned the direction of the city. Are there other things that would get people changing demographics, changing the size of the town over the years?
Well, I see that as all part of the issue of whether or not people are happy with the status quo. Sometimes significant changes in the size of the community, growth issues, are all seen as issues about how happy are we with whether or not the city is going in the direction that we want it to go in. And they may be over an enormous range of issues. The only other thing that I can think about is sometimes incumbents don't project well in terms of their leadership characteristics. And then people may also challenge them for that reason as well.
Because the situation in Peoria, another valley city, is they're arguing about an airport on where it's going in. And that seems to be the rallying cry of everyone now who's running for council over there. So something like that can also affect?
Oh, absolutely. Some of the most vicious fights are about zoning and utilization of land and how it affects your quality of life. Those are some of the biggest issues involved in decisions about whether or not people run for office, and on the part of the public about whether or not things are going well or badly.
So do you think when there's a lack of candidates, when a race isn't competitive, could that also reflect on the interest of voters?
Well, it does. And if the voters are interested in change, then you're going to find people who are going to challenge incumbents. When voters are not interested in change or are relatively apathetic, then it's a much, much harder climb to try to get into office. And frankly, there's a lot of work that has been done on this. Cities do vary in terms of the passion of its citizens about the nature of their community. I know in Tucson, for example, one of our great strengths and one of our great weaknesses is that we are incredibly passionate about the nature of the community and where it's going. And as a result of that passion, there's a lot of contestation for office all the time. In a lot of cities, there isn't that kind of passion amongst the public, and that makes contestation for office much, much more difficult.
Do you think that passion translates to the size of the town? Because Tucson is obviously a very big town. And Queen Creek is a rapidly growing town, and an argument can be made that because it's growing so quickly, residents really don't know their footing yet in terms of the government. But then you see a tiny little town like Florence where everyone's clamoring for a seat. So does the size of the town really matter to the passion?
It probably matters, although in a place like Bisbee, for example, which is a pretty small town, people are incredibly passionate about the nature of the community and where they're going to be going. In some cities that are relatively small but growing, new influx of citizens, for example, may not be attached to the nature of their community as in more stable cities where population growth is more limited. And so that attachment isn't quite there. In very large cities, it's hard to generate that passion. So there's typically a contrast between Phoenix and Tucson, for example,
right,
about how passionate citizens are about the nature of their city. But even in small cities, that passion can manifest itself very easily. And one of the ways in which smaller towns differ from places like Tucson is that there's a greater closeness to people in office, and sometimes that familiarity breeds support, but it can also breed contempt,
right,
and make life more difficult for incumbents.
Yeah, one incumbent was practically run out in Florence only because he was just very blunt in talking about things and was very passionate about supporting the downtown area, the older part of Florence, as opposed to the newer parts that have just been built. And because he was so plain-spoken, he really got dumped on a lot by the community.
Right.
And
when you're running against community norms, either in terms of what policies you engage in or the way in which you engage in those policies, can really backfire on incumbents. And what we see in smaller towns is that it doesn't have to get translated by the media. In larger cities, you don't see your elected officials very easily. Mm-hmm. In smaller towns, you do. They may shop in the same grocery stores. You may go down to City Hall. It's a very, very different environment, and it's much, much more difficult for elected officials to disengage from the public if they want to do so.
And that's interesting because, like as I said, Queen Creek is growing by leaps and bounds, yet the mayor and council members are still stopped at grocery stores and asked, when are we going to get more parks? When are we going to get this?
Exactly.
But that could be gone in 5 to 10 years, wouldn't you say, at the rate that town is growing?
The larger you get, I think the more distant elected officials become from the day-to-day lives of citizens. Yeah, that's exactly true.
So that distance as a town gets bigger, does that again kind of sap the energy of the voters, which in turn saps the competitiveness?
Yeah, you're asking a really good question, and I'm not sure I can tell you the reason behind this. Again, if I use Tucson as an example, we are incredibly passionate about our politics, but we were also incredibly passionate about our politics 50 or 60 years ago, mm-hmm. where we were half the size. So I'm guessing that in a lot of different communities, there is a culture of political passion that develops, and as you grow, it may be possible to keep that culture. How big you get, I don't know at what point you begin to lose that passion. But if it's culturally infused into the community, it will outlast a lot of different growth patterns. So if a place like Queen Creek is really passionate about its politics when it's really small and it begins to grow, it's likely to maintain that passion for quite some time.
Now, it was just incorporated in 1985. Could that
right.
also have an impact as the incorporation, as they distance themselves from the year of incorporation and they're not a young town anymore?
I guess my comparison would be to places like Morocco Marana and Oro Valley in southern Arizona, which were incorporated close to around that time frame, maybe a little bit earlier. And there's also a lot of passion both in Marana and Oro Valley, particularly when it comes to issues about quality of life and rezoning considerations and land use, water use, and so on. So it's very early on. There is a passion in creating a city, and it can be maintained for a substantial period of time.
Now you talk about it as a town that grows and still has a passion. I live in Tempe, which is like this progressive oasis in the desert, and it's always maintained that for the 30 some odd years I've lived here. And it's not a city that's sprawling. I mean, there's only one. You only go up in terms of population with apartment complexes. Why do you think Tempe is like that?
I wish I could tell you. My guess is that university communities tend to be different than other kind of communities. Tempe was dominated by ASU for a long, long period of time. Likewise, Tucson was dominated by the University of Arizona for a very long period of time. And in university communities, that passion for some reason appears very evident. This is also true of Austin, for example, in Texas, Columbus in Ohio, where actually the city has now outgrown its university source, but still maintains the passion that the universities helped to create.
That's funny because I lived in Waco, worked at Baylor University, and the exact opposite.
Yeah, and it can go the other way too. And the Texas political system is so different that Austin really sometimes stands out as an exception to what goes on in much of Texas. Although I just talked to somebody who taught at Denton.
Oh yeah, Texas. It's in North Texas.
Yeah, for a long period of time, and she thought that Denton was very, very different in terms of its political passion from all of the surrounding communities.
Yeah, and I grew up in El Paso County, far west Texas, and it's still one of the last bastions of blue in the state.
Right.
But everyone's always being indicted over there for something. So are there any other thoughts you might have about, why races are more competitive than others? I think we touched on passion of the citizens, people feeling good about it, how small and large towns can have a difference in how people connect. Is there anything else you think we missed?
Well, the only other thing that I would raise is and this gets really, really complex, but it's the nature of the political process in local elections that's often very different than anywhere else. People who run, for example, for the state legislature have political ambitions often far beyond the state legislature. They use their offices as a springboard for a larger political office. Typically, in local elections, that's not the case. People run because they're motivated to do something about their community. And in all the landscape in American politics is littered with people who thought that it would be a stepping stone to other office,
right.
but never got there because it's so difficult to actually run cities. People are happy with what you may be doing, but may not think that this translates well to further political ambitions. So you get a very different set of people who run for local office, motivated mostly by policy issues. And the ones who don't run because of policy issues, they run for other reasons like personal fame or personal glory, quickly find that there isn't much of that at the local level.
Unless you're like the mayor of like Atlanta or something like that.
Right. The mayor of Phoenix can run for Congress, although most mayors of Phoenix didn't make it to Congress. not likely to be able to do that as well. And certainly a council member from Glendale is not going to get there very easily.
Mm-hmm.
I can't recall that a single mayor, even in this place the size of Tucson, where a single mayor in Tucson actually successfully ran for congressional office.
Right.
If you're going to run for this stuff, you really need to run because you are committed to the nature of your community, and there isn't much beyond that. And the quote-unquote glory that may come from it quickly disappears when you realize what hard work you're actually doing.
Right.
If you're going to be doing a